Welcome back to Section 6, Christianity and Social Media. Our moderator is Dr. Mary Yun. She is a professor at the Holy Spirit Seminary College of Theology and Philosophy and a researcher at the Holy Spirit Study Center. Her research interests include Catholic social teachings and social ethics, church and society, contextual theology, feminist ethics, Confucian ethics, and interreligious dialogue. Dr. Yun, please.
Thank you, Lucia. Good afternoon, everyone. Now we come to the second session of day 2. I'm happy to be the moderator of this session. Just now we have this session discussed about the relationship about social media in the modern world. Now we have put a focus on Christianity, and we will focus on social media and Christianity. And we are very happy to have our 3 speakers in this session, Dr. Calida CHU, Father John Mission, and Father Bernardo. So I will introduce each one before your time of presentation. So first of all, I will introduce Dr. Calida CHU. She is a teaching fellow at the School of Divinity, University of Edinburgh. She received her PhD in World Christianity at the University of Edinburgh in 2020, with a thesis about Hong Kong public theology after 1997. She serves as an executive committee member of the Society for the Study of Theology. She will take up her role as teaching associate at the Department of Theology and Religious Studies in the University of Nottingham from September 2002 onwards. And the topic of her presentation is about, maybe she can introduce herself, her paper, and the title of her paper is Evangelization of the Christian Church in the 21st Century, a Digital Theological Perspective. And after Dr. CHU's presentation of 30 minutes, then we have 2 other speakers, and at the end we will have 20 minutes of discussion. So all the participants are welcome to write down your questions in the chat box. So now I pass the time to Dr. CHU.
Thank you, Dr. Yun, for the kind introduction, and greetings to you all from Edinburgh. Let me share my screen first. So we will continue the conversation about how digital media related to Christianity, and perhaps with some questions bringing on from Professor Gastaldo and also from Dr. Lam as well. So during the pandemic, we have all relied heavily on digital media to connect with the world. We keep refreshing news on digital media whenever one prefers to receive update on Facebook or YouTube, or even in WhatsApp or Signal groups among family and friends. We're forced to be familiar with digital media because it's the channel through which we get the latest news. Whatever social media, social networking services you may use, I'm sure you have heard of the phrase, if you like our channel, please click subscribe and follow us. In the digital space, we're trained to get more likes and follows on our social media content, as if these numbers determine the truthfulness of news and the statements we communicate online. However, in what ways do these kind of learned behaviors shape evangelization in the 21st century? This paper employs the methodology of digital theology to argue God's immanence in digital media through the evangelization activities of the people of God. I also use the theology of Stanley Howard, an American Methodist whose theology has been shaped to a large extent by Catholic ecclesiology, to argue the importance of Christian witness online and reflect on the concepts of church and world in the digital sphere. So in the contemporary discourse about digital media, let me highlight how inhuman it may be compared to in-person evangelization, making it an inferior medium for spreading the gospel. Yes, this was hardly the first shift in evangelization medium. One could point to a time when missionaries stepped onto the land of Africa and attempted to teach Africans to write their vernacular languages. A shift of medium requires readjustment and perhaps adaptation to the new medium. According to Marek Adam Wachowski, Propaganda Fide has been instrumental in training indigenous clergy and instructing a uniform program for missionary work. This is also evident when we talk about how the Hong Kong Catholic Church intends to develop a program for evangelization online. Andrew Walls, pioneer of the field of world Christianity, introduced the concept of penguin principle, argues that Christians are always, in some sense, penguins in nature. For him, all Christians and whatever nationality are led by adaptation with several millennia of someone else's history, with a whole set of ideas, concepts, and assumptions which do not necessarily square with the rest of the cultural inheritance. If one agrees with Wall's argument that the church should be penguins in culture, then the current question here is not whenever the church has to adapt to digital culture, but rather, in what ways the church assists Christ's followers and those of other faiths to interpret the fundamentals of the faith in the digital culture. A new medium comes with new challenges and opportunities to engage with the unreached. One of the major concerns about online, church online is disembodiment. This then comes to the debate about whether church online is virtual, using the language of media studies. Digital theologians tend to avoid the term virtual, as it implies that the interactions between brothers and sisters online are unreal. Because of this, digital scholars tend to use the term digital church rather than virtual church. Speaking of Christian liturgy, for Catholics, the major weakness of digital churches is that online Eucharist misses some crucial elements compared to an in-person one, because the former cannot replace the incarnational reality of a sacrament. The incarnational aspect here refers to Christ's bodily presence in the church as well as in the Eucharist, where Christ's body and blood are believed to be present in the consecrated elements. Furthermore, as stated in the Vatican document, The Church and the Internet, online community cannot substitute for real interpersonal community because of the implication of the absence of Christ in online Eucharist. The official newspaper of the Hong Kong Catholic Church established a guideline for those who participate in spiritual communion when physical gatherings were not possible during the lockdown, which some of you may be familiar with. Authority. One of the questions that have risen about Christian use of digital media is the authority of the interpretation of scripture. And perhaps, as Dr. Lam and Professor Gonzalo has said before, what kind of news is truthful and who determine what type of information should be posted online or among Christian communities. So in the past, printed materials about biblical hermeneutics tend to be selected by Christian publishers. However, in the digital era, people can express themselves freely online via social media, and their followers can read the biblical interpretations in the social media posts. This is one step more advanced than print culture, which we talked about yesterday, in which people gain access to the Bible in their own language without the need to hear from priests. Heidi Campbell of Texas A&M University studies the shift of authority among a new class of Christian workers that he calls religious digital creatives, RDCs. who have become influencers within the religious organizations online. Campbell argues that the authority of these LDCs is determined by 4 factors: role, power, relational, and algorithmic. While the LDC's authority can be strengthened through traditional means, such as one's role and social structure, which are related to power, it can also be weakened depending on one's relationship with other users and the algorithms within the social media platforms. Campbell's arguments complexifies the phenomenon of LDCs becoming authoritative figures online, especially those who do not normally have a grant to elaborate their theological perspective and other medium. Communication online is an expression of human relationships. It maintains and sustains relationships between friends, colleagues, and loved ones, not bounded by geographical location. The use of digital media has undoubtedly shifted our communication style, whenever for daily conversation or for evangelization. Before the invention of emojis, perhaps no one communicated with others using icons, except those using augmentative or alternative communication devices. But now, 6 million emojis are used in communication every day. This is also observable in the Christian world. For example, the sequence of the emojis here are used to represent baptism and the Virgin Mary. Even if you have not heard of these sequence of emojis, you're probably familiar with the prayer emojis, which you see in Figure 2, which you may respond to someone's prayer request. This is not to declare that texts are no longer important in today's world, but to highlight that the phenomenon that language can evolve in different media, and it happens that online users are more comfortable with using emojis in digital media than in printed materials. As the Pontifical Council of Communication, Social Communication argued and Aetatis Novae, communication in and by the Church is essentially communication of the good news of Jesus Christ. A new medium can cause new challenges, but this does not imply that Christians should detach from social media because of the potential to sin on this new platform. The question Christians should ask is, in what ways the church community can play a role in the digital space to assist in spreading the good news of God, as well as to be a good testimony in this medium. As a digital theologian, I affirm God's immanence in the world, which includes the digital space. In my own working definition, digital theology is the process of faith-seeking understanding to comprehend the nature of God, or of God's interaction with the world, or of the digital space exploration of the mystery of faith. This employs St. Anselm's perception that theology is a process of faith-seeking understanding. Therefore, my approach here is to analyze the ways in which the Church assists us with and illustrates God activities in the digital space. To take part in the evangelization of God's word and God's activities in the digital space, Catholic Ephesus, Case Ott's comments. As Christians, we ask these 2 questions in relation to who God called us to be and what called us to do. The formation of self and our relationship in the digital world then relates directly to Christian concern about virtue and how we can be most responsive to God in relationship with us. He mainly speaks to American audience who are more comfortable with expressing themselves and highlighting how they may be different as an individual online. For the audience of this conference, perhaps you're not as expressive as our targeted audience on social media apps. But our perspective assists one in rethinking how God called us to be and to do online, to show God's relationship with us. In her monograph, Christian Ethics for a Digital Society, Oakes introduced the concept of networked cells to illustrate how we are all connected beings online. whenever this is with our loved one or with God. This argument can overcome the limitation of the mindset that testimony is merely about individual expression. As relational beings, we are all connected with others, and thus our posts, comments, and likes affect how others and God see us. One of the burning issues is perhaps how evangelization is adapted or transformed in the digital culture. In light of this, Evangelii Luteandi provides some valuable insights for dealing with the digital culture, though it was published in 1975, before the widespread use of the internet. What matters to evangelize man's culture and cultures? In the wide and rich sense which these terms have in Guardian and Spes, always taking the person as one starting point and always coming back to the relationship of people among themselves and with God. The gospel, and therefore evangelization, are certainly not identical with culture, and they are independent in regard to all cultures. Nevertheless, the kingdom which the gospel proclaims is lived by men who are profoundly linked to our culture, and the building of the kingdom cannot avoid borrowing the elements of human culture or cultures. Though independent of cultures, the gospel and evangelization are not necessarily incompatible with them. Rather, they're capable of permeating them all without being subject to any one of them. While the context of Evangelii Luteandi suggests is usually about the missionary field, where missionaries need to evangelize in a culture other than their own, the implication here is rather similar, in that the church is still required to be sensitive to the digital culture, not only about the change of language online, but also how Christians can evangelize in a creative way, taking advantage of the new medium. This also raises questions about the acceptability of audience of the gospel. In the current generation of evangelists, most are digital immigrants. In other words, they are not born into the world where digital media has penetrated into all parts of life. However, the next generation, the digital natives, has been raised in an environment in which digital media is essential for their life. The way of life in the 21st century requires us to rethink and renew the way we evangelize in the digital space. As Evangelii Luteandi continues, the person who has been evangelized goes on to evangelize others. He aligns the test of truth, the touchstone of evangelization. It is unthinkable that a person should accept the word and give himself or herself to the kingdom without becoming a person who bears witness to it and proclaims it in his or her turn. Rather than merely seeing evangelization as a task or only about doing, Evangelii Luteandi reminded us that evangelization is about the being of Christians, the grace and vocation proper to the church, her deepest identity. Bearing witnesses is not only about the word, though it is important, but it is also about living out the word of Christ and affirming one's identity as the children of God and as Christian communities. Being the light of the digital world means that the online presence of collective individuals also demonstrate a type of holiness that edifies others, whenever in private posts or on public forum. For this now return to the communal witness of the church online. When talking about online witness, Christians, especially evangelicals, tend to think about individual behavior online, for example, how one may reply to hostile comments on social media, or whenever one should post testimonies online. Online witnesses is not merely constructed by one individual. Instead, it is shaped by all believers in the church community. As Pope Francis state on Instagram, the most holy Trinity teaches us that a person can never be without the other. We are not islands. We're in the world to live in God's image. open, in need of others, and in need of helping others. People of other faiths may not judge an individual who put offensive comments online, but they may be concerned with online Christian groups who do or do not do certain things. When Stanley Howard published his monograph, A Community of Character in 1981, social media apps did not exist. In fact, even desktop computers were not widely used in the 1980s. However, his perspective of alternative community can still be irrelevant in the 2020s, when the social media world is full of adversity, as we discussed this morning, fake news, etc. So digital media may have evolved from print materials, but the division in the world is still evident, online and offline. His proposal is a reminder of how Christian communities can be faithful witnesses in light of these phenomena online. For Howard, the ability of the church to interpret and provide alternatives to the loyalties of the world results from the story, a particular story, to be sure, that teaches us the significance of lives different from our own, within and without our community. Indeed, we only learn what that story entails as it is lived and lives through the lives of others. If we are to trust in the truthfulness of the stories of God, we must also trust that the other lives, as frightening as it may first appear, is necessary for our own. It is the story of God in the scripture that encourages Jesus' followers to create their own stories, imitating Christ. In some ways, this echoes Campbell's and Garner's comments in terms of how evangelization in both online and offline networks developed by Christian individuals should point to Christ, the ultimate example of his follower. Likewise, in the digital world, it is one's narrative that invites non-Christians to be curious about the Christian belief. Although Howard's post was published almost 40 years ago, people's urge to narrate their daily experience has not lessened. Scrolling through social media apps like Facebook and Instagram, or TikToks even, one can see how people are longing to express their opinions and record their highlights with the story's function. Not only can one find testimonies online from a wide range of believers, one may also see how Christians form an alternative community in the digital world. The Youth Boiling Point is a new media platform established in 2016 by the Hong Kong Diocesan Audiovisual Center and the Hong Kong Diocesan Youth Commission. On its Facebook page, the Youth Boiling Point shares its vision to share faith, creativity, formation, and evangelization. Not only has the Youth Boiling Point posted music and videos to allow young Hong Kong Catholics to share their testimony, it also created WhatsApp and Signal stickers with Christian themes, such as those here, like related to Easter, or maybe related to the examinations of the Hong Kong Diploma of Secondary Education, to show how digital media can be connected to the daily lives and the struggle of young people. Indeed, social media platforms can be used to announce news through official channels as a substitute for print newspapers, like the Catholic Way 公教頻道, which provides updates about online masses and news of the Hong Kong Catholic Church. But one may also notice how layperson can witness the gospel creatively online. As another pioneer of world Christianity, Namin Sena states, standard theological models of Christianity have presented Bible translation as a closed-circuit organism, whose main pathways of communication have laid in cognitive, normative channels. Faced with this imposing immobile system, the task of the theologian was seen as codifying the religion mapping the contours of its form and the lineament of its function, predicting and prescribing of changes in behavior, preventing foreign matter from entering it, repairing deviations and aberrations, fixing the qualities that alone define and do not define the religion, and generalizing about how God works in the world. Likewise, stretching a particular medium for evangelization equally minimize God's work in the world, whenever it's digital or not. Highlighting one type of medium as the most effective for evangelization seems to me a denial of God's creative work and encounter with human beings, due to God's omnipotent and omnipresent nature, that he's knowledgeable and he's present all over the world. God can and will reveal God's self in whatever medium God pleases. Note that I have been talking about online evangelization for most of this presentation, but I should stress that relationship is not only formed online. Evangelization requires online and offline communication to nurture relationship of those we want to reach. Online and offline testimony are just as important. As Methodist digital theologian Pace Phillips suggests, the church has to be hybrid. It has to nurture both online and offline community in the future. For him, God's mission is confined neither to online nor offline church. Indeed, that distinction is increasingly redundant. Though the mission of God is part of the mission of God, the mission of church is part of the mission of God. God's mission is not limited to our mission. Let this be a reminder when we encourage our online followers to come to Christ, the first influencer of the Christian faith. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. CHU. Yeah, you still have a few minutes left. Yeah, so we can leave that time for discussion later. Yeah, thank you. Dr. CHU points out some important elements of evangelization and also how to proceed in evangelization in a new era that we emphasize so much on social media. But she also points out some important questions for us to ponder. What's the church future? Should we focus mainly on online mode, or we should also employ a hybrid mode? So we can discuss this question later after hearing all the presentations. So now we go to the second presentation by Father John Lee Shen. Father John Lee Shen is a priest from Jiaoshan Diocese in China. He obtained an STL MA in Social and Pastoral Communication from the University of Santo Thomas in Philippines in 2010. And from 2010 to 2012, he promoted the Bible study movement in China, namely the Little Rock Scripture Study Program, with more than 50,000 members from different parts of China. He's also a former coordinator for the Mandarin service of Radio Veritas Asia in Manila. He is now pursuing doctorate studies and currently also teaching in the Social and Pastoral Communication program in the University of Santo Thomas. And today, Father Lee Shen will share with us about the church and communication. Thank you. So I pass the time to Father Lee Shen.
Hello, good afternoon and good evening or good morning. In my case now, I'm here in Canada. It's very early in the morning. That's why you can see my sleepy eyes. I hope that my sharing will not put you into sleep. Well, I try to make my presentations more like a dialogue or just sharing of a few of the points that I want to bring to this conference. The topic assigned to me is church and communication. When we hear the term or the word communication, most of us or most of the people, they think immediately of the means, internet, the gadget, or social media. But in fact, the word communication is much more than those techniques or means of social communications. And because communication is considered as the essential elements of human being, it's the determining fact that all of us as human persons, there is a saying that as human person, we cannot not communicate. That's how essential the communication for all of us. And the communication, the word communication comes from the Latin root word communis, or communus, which means to share something in common. To share something in common. That communication, for communication to happen, it is the interaction or exchange of, between the individuals that we share what we have. And then another root word of the word communication is the munus in Latin, which means gifts. If we consider communication as the essential elements of our human nature, then there is a theological reflection on why communication is our nature. If we believe that we are created after the image of likeness of God, that it is logically, like Karl Rahner pointed out, that we as communication being, because God, our creator, is also a communicating being. That's why for Karl Rahner, that God is a self-communicating God. And because God is self-communicating God, that he give himself, he share himself to all creators and to us as a gift. So that's why we are able to communicate. So there is a trend in the field of theology that also what we call the communication theology. So if we define theology as the study of God, of the divine, and then communication theology is to understand theology or understand God under the perspective of communication, is to use the communication as the principal concepts in understanding God. And there are 4 elements in communication theology. It's also the elements of our faith. And the first element is the Holy Trinity, because that's the source of our faith. That's the God we believed. And in communication theology, we understand the Holy Trinity as the source of communication, or as communication. And St. Thomas Aquinas used to describe the activity among the 3 persons, the 3 individuals, the action of love. And in communication theology, we understand this activity among the 3 persons, Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, described as the unceasing communication of love that built a community with the 3 divine persons called as Trinity. And then because of this unceasing and internal, unending communication of love between the 3 persons, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, that leading to the perfect communing. And that's another root word of the word communication. Communing, the perfect unity among the three persons. And this communication of love in the Holy Trinity does not keep to itself, but also flow out and shared in creature and to us, to our human beings. And through the act of communication of the Trinity, which is we call the revelation. And the whole Bible, according to Carlo Martini, the former Archbishop of Milan, one of the great communication theologians, he described that the whole Bible from the first page to the last page is actually a record of God's communication. And in the Old Testament, that we see how God communicates through marvelous deeds, words, through persons, through natural phenomena, or even through wars and disasters. And he communicates through the prophets, the kings, the judges. And that's why in the letter to the Hebrews, chapter 1 opens with, in the old times, God communicated to our ancestors through different various means. But the perfect of this Trinitarian communication and the peak or the highest point of this divine communication is being realized in the person of Jesus. That's why after the second elements of revelation and the third elements in communication theology is the incarnation in the person of Jesus Christ, who is also the center of the divine communication and divine revelation. And yesterday, Cardinal Tagle reminds us that for any evangelization, no matter old or new, or any communication of the church, we have to focus and centered and grounded on the person of Jesus. In the church document, communication document, Communion et Progressio, number 11, it describes Jesus as the perfect communicator. Why? Because God, who is unseen, but now could be seen and touched and experienced and observed by our own eyes. The divine communication is not only communicate through means and the media, but he himself came and become flesh and enter into the human history. And the whole life of Jesus is the perfect illusion and a manifestation of the divine. That's why Jesus said, "Those who have seen me has seen the Father." And Jesus communicates not only by words, but also by his very person. And the communication of Jesus is not only transforming or transfer messages, but also to communicate his life. And he gives his life to us. And I always fascinating to meditate about the communication of Jesus. Like when the story that Jesus encountered with this Samaritan woman. In my class with my students in UST in St. Thomas, I always ask them to analyze the communication elements of Jesus' encounter with this Samaritan woman, like the timing, the venue that Jesus encountered with this woman. like the time we know that Jesus met this Samaritan woman at noontime, which supposedly, no people would dare to come out under the big sun to get water. And it's also a time that if you draw water from the well, it's not the good time. But that communicates something, that communicates the tenderness of Jesus, knowing the situation of this Samaritan woman, that he's excommunicated, he's excluded from the society. But Jesus was waiting her there to have this intimate encounter. So the communication of Jesus is actually a life-changing experience, an exchange of life. That's why after the encounter, the Samaritan woman changed her life. And Jesus also used his life to define the meaning of communication. As it is stated in Progressio, says, Jesus defined communication as giving oneself in love. It is the disposition of sharing, of loving. So what is communication for us? Definitely is not only the means and instruments or media, but rather it is a life. It's giving oneself in love. It's that disposition defines Christian communication. And Jesus also, during his lifetime, he established a community of the disciples called the church. And so the church, by its very nature, is a community of communication. It's a community of evangelization. Is to continue the Trinitarian communication and here and now in this world. And the communication of the church has two approaches. And the first approach is what we call the ad intra, within the church. That referring to all the pastoral ministries of the church, like the preaching, liturgy, catechetics, biblical ministry, diaconia, the service. These are all approaches of the pastoral communication ministry of the church. And another communication of the church towards the outside, in communication theology, we call evangelizing communication, the ad extra. That refers to how the church communicate herself or portray her image to the outside world. Its public relation with other religion, with other culture, and how the church as community of communication of God, manifests the very life and nature of God in today's world, and also in the life of the people for today. So after sharing the communication theology, especially the four elements, the Trinity, the revelation, incarnation, and the church. Actually, from the very beginning, the church is very closely, associated or like communication has been from the very beginning with the church and has been the focus of the church. As I mentioned, that Jesus was considered as the perfect communicator. In the early Christian era, that we also learned that the early Christian community is the community of communing. They love one another. They share everything they have with one another. And then the early missionaries, including the disciples, the apostles, they employ all kinds of means that are available to them to communicate, to connect with outside the world, with others. One of the best examples is St. Paul, that he wrote letters, he traveled, and he preached in the land of Gentiles, and to communicate the gospel to the non-believers, to the pagans. And under the persecution, the early Christians also communicate and identify themselves with some secret codes, drawings. And during the period of the persecution, the communication never stops among the members of the early Christian communities. And then once the Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire, and that stage until the medieval age is considered that in communication history, Christian communication history, it's like the church is owning all the communication means. And because at that time, the clergy are one of the few who can read and write. And the word monastery is very much associated with like a place of keeping the scripts and books. And one of the major charisms of the monastic life is to duplicate and copy and handwritten of those scripts, Bibles, and also other books of science, of nature. And all the, since at that time, in the early history of the Christian community, since ordinary people couldn't read and write, that also affects the means of the communication of the church, like the architect of the church buildings, and even those beautiful stained glasses in the ancient churches. And these are the ways that the early Christian community at that time communicating or doing catechetical ministry, by putting the stories of the Bible on the windows, on the glasses. And so at that time, the early, like before the medieval age, before the Gutenberg printing technique invented, the church was considered as like the owning all the communication means. And when you have the information, when you control the communication, you have the power. That's why the church was considered as dominant in any aspect of communication. But after the Gutenberg, since there is kind of a revolution in communication, and then it was the Protestant church who first used those modern means of communication, especially the printing. And from my article, you can see that the Protestant communities employ very much of this new technology at that time. They printed the Bible and also other materials. And because of that, the church was like in the offensive mode towards this new developments in social media, in social communication. It carries a kind of offensive attitude towards this new development until the late 19th century, that the church published the list for the prohibited books and to criticize the it's like, you know, it's like in a kind of offensive manner towards this development in social communication. But since the last 19th century, there is the paradigm shift of the attitude of the church towards social communication. And this could be reflected in the different church documents. And the first, the church document that solely deals with social communication is published in 1936, the Vigilante Cula, written by Pope Pius XI. At that time, the motion pictures, the films or movies, now what we call nowadays, it's just invented, and it had great impact on the life of the people. And so Pius XI issued that document, Vigilante Cula, to have a kind of pastoral instructions for the Catholic Church, and to have a critical approach to the motion pictures. But at the same time, Pope Pius XI affirms the positive influence of the film on the human soul and the human mind. That's why, to encourage the Catholics to pay attention to this new development in social communication, especially with motion pictures. And second document I want to mention is the Miranda Process, the remarkable invention. And this encyclical is not only focused on the film alone, but also extended all at that time in 1957, and the invention of radio and other television, and become, you know, popular and to any household. And then in that document, and shows the special intention or interest of Pius XI.
Excuse me, Father, you have 5 more minutes.
Okay. And then comes the third document, is the Vatican document, the decree on social communication, the Inter Magnificat. That was considered as the first conciliar document on communication ever released. That these documents affirms that the church has the birthright to use the marvels of the media and the communication means, and is also encouraging the faithful, including the clergy, to have a certain formation and training in order to make good use of it. And actually, the concept of social communication itself is from the Inter Magnificat. The very word social communication is the contribution of the Vatican II in this document of Inter Magnificat. And also the World Communication Day celebration is also introduced in Inter Magnificat. And another important church document on communication is Communicare Progressio, which I love very much, is actually serving as the foundation of the communication theology, because it's invited the church to have a critical thinking on communication, at the same time to offer the theological foundations. It is in which that Jesus was called the perfect communicator. And then it's also emphasized on the formation and training of communication, not only for the clergy and also for the lay faithful. And from this document, we can see that the attitude of the church towards communication or social communication is changed from offensive and to critical understanding. And unfortunately, like Communicare Progressio, until now, there is no Chinese translation. I don't know how many minutes I still have, but I like to use this last few minutes to share something, because the conference asked me to have a reflection on the church and communication in China, because I'm from China. But now it's 2.5 minutes. Okay. Since it's a sensitive issue, so I just like share with you a story of a diocesan newspaper. In a certain diocese, actually, it's my diocese. We had the first diocesan newspaper in 1995. It's called The Bell. It's ran for 3 years, from 1995 to 1998, and it was published like 50,000 copies monthly. But since they reported some sensitive issue, and then they were closed. And then in year 2000, we had another one called the Master Seat. It's another diocesan newspaper, and it survives for 5 years. And then for the reason that everybody know, is the Master Seat also cannot grow. And then the third diocesan newspaper that we had is from right after the close of the Master Seat. We had a Gentle Wind. Maybe that Gentle Wind is very gentle, so it survives more than 10 years till recently, before the pandemic, 2018. So the life of this diocesan newspaper, the 3 stages from the bell to the Master Seat and to the Gentle Wind, we can sense that how difficult the communication ministry of the church in China is. Especially, we know that I even see from the questions that somebody already mentioned, since March, they have the government tried to implement a kind of restrictions for the online religious activities. And especially in few days, September 1, these regulations will be implemented. So how can we, as church communicators, facing this challenge? I like to conclude with my sharing with a short story that I learned from the former chairman of the Congregation of Social Communication of the Holy See, Archbishop Celli. And then he told us that in an ancient Italian town, before before people had electricity, the way that people entertain themselves is to, after dinner, they will go to the palace of the town, because there are a lot of performers and people can relax or entertain themselves. And on the square, on the plaza, there is a singer, very famous, because he himself as a mini band. And not only he sing very well, but at the same time he can play the organ, the flute, and also the keyboard or the guitar at the same time. So he himself as like a mini band. So that's why people enjoy, go to him every day. But because he's so talented, he knows so many things. That's why he got jealous with other performers. So one day they stole his guitar, they destroyed his organ, and till one day that he lost all the instruments. So people thought that he would not sing anymore. But when people gathered on the palace, and they heard this singer sing solely and beautifully without those instruments, and people asked him, "Oh, you see, those bad people, they destroy your instrument and stolen them. Why you are still singing?" And then this singer said, "Well, they can take away my instrument, destroy my organs and guitar, but they cannot destroy the music in my heart." So I think this story, tells us a lot of things, especially for us. How can we facing the challenge of doing communication ministry in China with these restrictions and limitations? Okay, thank you, and God bless.
Thank you. Thank you, Father Mission, sharing with us communication theology and also his own experience in China. We hope to hear more after. Yeah. So now we have the first speaker with us, Father Bernardo. I know Father Bernardo for some time, but I still have to introduce you. Father Bernardo CERVELLERA is a journalist and a missionary with the PIME Fathers. Until May 2021, he was the head of the Asian News Press Agency. From 1997 to 2002, he was editor of Fide, the Vatican International Press Agency. Between 1990 and 1997, he lived in Hong Kong and Beijing. He is a contributor to various newspapers, magazines, and collaborators in the production of radio and TV news and programs. So he's very experienced in the church media. So we're happy to have him to share with us today about propaganda fide and mission as communication.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me at this important symposium. I have to tell you that how can I say that the point of view which I'm trying to give you is a quite historical point of view, contemporary, but also of the past, because it reminds me that the sentence of a philosopher in the 18th century: those who don't study history are condemned to repeat it. And in fact, studying and producing this paper, I noticed that many of the problems that the church had in the past are the same that the church has now with the different countries, with various countries. Also listening to the question of today, in the session of today, I noticed that perhaps in the history of the church, we can find something which can be useful, like suggestions, good suggestions. So it's very important to study history. Anyway, propaganda fide and mission as communication. The congregation of propaganda fide as a structural element of the Vatican congregations was and is a sign of modernity in the life of the church, and also in some way a vindication of the religious character of the church missions and not of a colonial experiment of the church mission. Propaganda Fide, as we know, was founded on the 6th January 1622 by Pope Gregory XV. Two factors contributed to its birth. First, in the 16th and 17th centuries, there was a great spiritual renaissance among Catholics, the result, on the one hand, of the Protestant boom, which drove Catholics to oppose them, but also bringing up a desire to revitalize the faith and spread it throughout the world. Second reason, until then, the non-European missions had been placed under the protection of two political powers, Spain and Portugal. The Padroado, that was the name given to this type of protection, had to ensure means for travel, sustenance, and the building of missionary stations, churches, colleges. Many times this happened admirably. But in the long run, the two powers increasingly used missionaries and evangelization as a means to increase their own wealth and trade. The King of Spain or of Portugal were considered almost divine representatives with the power to choose bishops, missionaries, decide strategies, catechism, education, and so on. In this way, evangelization was very often subservient, if not captive, to the economic and political interests of the political powers, while papal instructions were not followed. From this point of view, the birth of Propaganda Fide represents a new chapter in the spiritual dependence on the pontiff, limiting or eliminating the incursions of political powers into the spiritual sphere. From this situation, Propaganda Fide spawned a series of apostolic vicars, bishops in mission areas, and missionaries who did not have to swear obedience to the Padroado, but were independent of it and instead directly dependent on the Holy See. Their life was not very easy, often having to protect themselves or hide from the Spaniards and Portuguese. But it was a turning point from the colonial mission to the purely ecclesiastical mission. The most important aspect of this novel approach is the focus on supporting the birth of local clergy, attention and care towards local culture, not exporting European religious models to mission countries. And for China, for example, even the permission to use the Chinese language in the liturgy. The colonial powers, on the other hand, were opposed to the growth of local priests and demanded that the new mission church be in some way a branch of the church in Spain or Portugal. From the beginning, Propaganda Fide needed communication. Since it had to uphold the freedom of the missions from interference and influence from the great Western powers, it had to find free and special ways of communications, kept alive at all times. At the same time, it had to maintain a relationship of help and support with the missions by putting in place communication tools between the peripheries in the various Asian, African, and Latin American countries and the center of Catholicity in Rome. There were two basic tools for communication. First, the apostolic vicars had to send Propaganda Fide a detailed report on the state of their missions at least once a year. The second were the nuncios, at least those not attached to the crowns of Spain and Portugal, who acted as intermediaries between the missionaries and the papal curia and the Pope himself. The Propaganda Fide's push towards attention to local cultures pushed the missionaries even more to be profound connoisseurs of the language and customs of the population in which they were embedded. This is why they acted really as cultural mediators, bringing together Eastern and Western cultures. We cannot forget that after the great epic of Matteo Ricci, the Jesuits remained at the Chinese emperor's court as astronomers, painters, but also as official translators, used especially in the emperor's dealing with foreign delegations until the end of the 19th century. At the same time, much book production on China brought to the West provoked new ways of thinking and reflecting on society and power. Among them, there was the Jesuit Nicolas Strigol, who translated Matteo Ricci's travel diaries into Latin, as well as many European scientific works into Chinese. Another instrument of cultural mediation were the so-called edifying and curious letters written by Jesuit missionaries or the Missions étrangères de Paris, which influenced even the rationalist and Enlightenment world of the time. It might also be said that these missions in the East, and especially in China, provoked an international debate. It is impressive to read that not only missionaries in China, but also those in the Philippines, Mexico, German, French, Spanish bishops, and so on, intervene in alternating phases on the question of the Chinese rights in the 18th century. Even more interesting is the foundation of the annals of the propagation of the faith, starting in 1824. From France, it spread throughout Europe to the point of having 19 translations in different languages. According to some historians, such as Robert Strait, OMI, this journal, which published reports by missionary bishops or representatives appointed by them, is one of the most important sources of missionaries' history of our time. Then came the difficult centuries. The Catholic Church and the papacy have not always had a good relationship with mass communication. The relationship between mass media and the papacy soared in the 18th century. First of all, with the growth in power of the nation states in Europe. They wanted, on the one hand, to limit the cultural space occupied by the church with schools and universities, and on the other hand, to intervene more and more in the life of Christian communities, claiming to manage episcopal elections, the distribution of parishes, the revision of church property, even to the point of influencing elections to the papacy. The other very important fact that created an even greater division between church and modernity was the French Revolution, 1789. Although its ideals of equality and participation in public affairs were at first shared by many French priests and bishops, it gradually took on a clear anti-Christian and persecutory characters. Thus, its ideals of freedom of the press and opinion were associated with an elimination of the non-revolutionary clergy, a replacement of the worship of God by the worship of the goddess reason, and the strengthening of a national church that dispensed with the relationship with the Pope. If one adds to this the period of the terror, 1793 up to 1794, with its series of repressions and executions against all those who were considered enemies or suspected enemies, one understands the difficulty the popes had in seeing in the proclamation of freedoms something good for society. Such freedoms were seen as a tool for anarchy and violence. With Napoleone Bonaparte, things changed a little bit. There were fewer executions, but control over the church had become total. There was even an oath to the emperor, to which all priests and bishops were subject, and only then could exercise their ministry, very similar to China now. Although a concordat was passed between the empire and the Holy See in 1801, it was betrayed by the emperor himself, who demanded the Pope's total submission to his policy, using it against the other European powers and demanding a large number of French cardinals. Pius VII, who as a sign of detente had even gone as far as France to crown Bonaparte emperor, refused. In 1809, French troops occupied the Papal States and arrested the Pope, who was taken to France, then to Savona, then again to France, still a prisoner of the emperor. The Pope only returned to Rome with the fall of Napoleon in 1814. A further important element that kept the papacy away from modernity was the so-called Roman question, id est, the Papal States. Since the year 728, with the so-called donation of Sutri, the Pope was to receive as a gift territories that he had to manage in the Middle Ages in the face of disaster, abandonment, and the lack of other authorities. Subsequently, these territories, of which the Pope was the sovereign to all intents and purposes, were seen as a guarantee for the pontiff's freedom against all those who wished to influence and constrain his spiritual choices. But the ideals of Italian national unity led to an increasing fragility of papal political power until the seizure of Rome in 1870 and the unification of Italy. Pius IX, the Pope of the time, who had been sympathetic to the liberal world at the beginning of his pontificate, condemned this loss of political power with the risk of loss of freedom, attributing it to the spirit of the French Revolution. The syllabus, a list of phrases the Church opposed, published in 1864, together condemned philosophies that reduced the value of Christian revelations, together with nationalism, communism, atheism, and liberalism. It must be said that the King of Italy, inspired by an anti-religious liberalism, did not only stop at the expropriation of ecclesiastical property, but went so far as to cancel religious orders, subjugating the church more and more to the state. In this period, with the Pope constrained and immersed in Italian and European problems, there was little sensitivity to the problems and life of the missions. A sign of this is that the First Vatican Council in 1868, despite the presence of dozens of bishops from the missions of India, China, and other nations, that council only dealt with issues related to Eastern churches of the Middle East. Then came Leo XIII, successor to Pius IX. Then there was a resumption of the papacy relationship with the modern liberal world, with industrial society, with the working class world. With Benedict XV, Pope from 1914 to 1922, there was a real overcoming of Eurocentrism to affirm the religious quality of the Catholic Church and its universal characteristic, interested in the faith of humanity at all latitudes. Maximum Illud of the 1919 relaunched the church mission, supporting inculturation, the study of language as culture, the growth of local clergy, warning missionaries against improper ties with Western powers. He also relaunched Christian proclamation as the missionary task of every baptized person, every priest or bishop, and not just the work of a few specialists. This led to a dizzying increase in missionary assignment and an increase in mission publications and studies with magazines, books, language dictionaries, translations. Propaganda Fide supported all this work, also relieved by the fact that no longer had to worry about the Eastern churches. The anti-Europeanism of the Maximum Illud was born of the sadness that arose after the First World War, caused by European and so-called Christian powers fighting each other, but also from the great experience of the Church in mission. From the end of Napoleon's empire and increasingly throughout the 19th century, various missionary institutes, including my institute, PIME, came into being. At the same time, many traditional congregations took the word missions to heart, spreading beyond the European world. In the second half of the 19th century, missions began in Oceania and Central Africa, and those in China, Vietnam, and Japan expanded. The experiences of the missionaries, their scientific, naturalistic, cultural, geographical, ethnological, and archaeological discoveries were reported to the churches of origin through annals and magazines, creating an important and valuable flow of communication. However, it will be necessary to wait until the Second Vatican Council to find a reflection on the value of the media and an appreciation for them in the Church. Before the Council,
Father Bernardo, you have 10 minutes left. Maybe you want to summarize your paper a bit.
Perhaps Inter Mirifica, already the father before me, myself talked. But anyway, Inter Mirifica is the very important document which is produced in the Second Vatican Council. But what is important for me is to stress the value of the media for the popes, for the latest pope. First of all, John Paul II, because John Paul II was pope from 1978 to 2005, integrated the mass media into the life of the Church, first and foremost through his personal testimony. A man who made theater in the past, Wojtyła would personally engage with journalists. In his speeches, he always used the word I, not the formal we. He accepted questions put to him without defending himself. If we add to this his travels, 104 apostolic visits outside Italy, and the World Youth Days, all structured as media events, right up to his funeral, attended by dozens of heads of state from all over the world, we can understand why television stations around the globe followed him everywhere. At the same time, Wojtyła did not hold back in defending human rights and religious freedom. He shouted for peace against war. He urged attention, fraternity, religious sentiment. He condemned abortion, threats to family life, the unjust exploitation of workers, and so on. On the one hand, he made the mass media true instruments of evangelization. On the other, he experienced the mass media as an indispensable element of modern society. And it is worth recalling here what he says in his encyclical Redemptoris Missio, always the topic of missions, in which he says that the mass media, to some degree, the mass media has become the first areopagus of the modern age, the world of the communication. And this, to some degree, perhaps this Areopagus has been neglected, and we should try not only to use the mass media to spread the gospel, but to understand, but to integrate that message into the new culture created by modern communication. It's very, very important, this letter. Throughout his pontificate, John Paul II was above all a television star, and started also to use internet. I have to tell you that the first Vatican publication to use the internet and online publication was precisely Fides, linked to Propaganda Fides. In 1998, on the occasion of the extraordinary Synod for Asia, two Chinese bishops were invited to take part in it. Monsignor Mattia Tuan Ing Min and Monsignor Joseph Xu Xuan, respectively ordinary and coadjutor of the Diocese of Wanxian, Sichuan, but the Beijing government forbade them to travel to Rome. So Fides started online publication, adding the Chinese language to its article, in addition to Italian, French, English, German, and Spanish, creating perhaps one of the first almost direct links between the Vatican and the Chinese Church. Then came Benedict XVI, who was a great communicator, but was very manipulated, because some of his speech were really misunderstood and manipulated, like the Regensburg speech in the 12 September 2006, which was a critique of the anti-religious positivism of the West, but was dismissed as an anti-Islamic stance. Or his statements on the fight against AIDS, for which the use of condoms is not enough, is proven by many studies and universities that started a war against the pontiff, and many others. Then comes from Pope Francis, who is very simple and direct, and in addition to his choice for a poor pontificate, he tries to meet with everybody and tries to talk with everybody, using his trip to launch some symbol, like the trip to Lampedusa, to remember migrants who drowned in the Mediterranean Sea, the trip to Lesbos to meet migrants in refugee camps, the world prayer for peace to avert an air attack on Syria, and so on. All these gestures received worldwide coverage and made his message on globalization of indifference or on a piecemeal third world very important slogan and push to a change of mentalities. The last things I would like to share with you are the press agencies, which are some of the most important instruments to build up bridges and not walls, like the Pope Francis says always. Because in the last century, a number of missionary agencies arose with Propaganda Fide and its mission. First of all is Fides. Oh, let me say that the sources of these missionary agencies are closer to the situation being discussed, so are not tied to the European or American mentality, attentive to religious and cultural aspects and not just economic ones or exotic ones. The first missionary agency was Fides, founded on April 4, 1927. As I told you, there are different languages, and many journalists recognize that Fides was perhaps one of the few independent sources during the Vietnam War, informing on what was happening in Catholic and non-Catholic villages beyond the pro-American or pro-Vietnamese information gathered in hotels in Saigon or Hanoi. Then in 1979 came UCAN Union of Catholic Asian News Agency, which was launched in Hong Kong, first supported by the Maryknoll missionaries, then by the Australian Jesuit community. With its editions in various Asian languages, English, Chinese, Indonesian, Korean, Vietnamese, it grew from a weekly bulletin to a website. Then in 1983, the Missions Étrangères de Paris launched Église d'Asie, first as a monthly magazine and then as a website. In 1986, the PIME founded Asia News. In 2003, Asia News, which was first a bi-weekly bulletin, became a daily online agency in 3 languages. And Italian, English, and Chinese. In 2013, with the advent of Pope Francis, Spanish also was added. I was editor of Asia News for 18 years, as Maria told. I have to say that Asia News is not a confessional agency, although it provides timely information of the churches in Asia. But it is interested in the whole of Asia, including politics and economics, always with an eye to the human dimension. Among its readers, there are many non-Christians, Muslims, Hindus, Tibetans. International newspapers and agencies and television stations draw on these sources. The agencies are very important also because they built up solidarity with different problems. For example, Christians in Saudi prisons, campaign for freedom in Tibet, scholarship for Chinese students, support for refugees in Iraq, and to free brick factory workers in Pakistan, and so on. So my conclusion. At the foundation of Propaganda Fide, the Church looked upon the media, those not controlled by it, as an enemy, and freedom of the press as a satanic plague. With the beginning of the 21st century, the Church looks at the media as an important element of society, in which it finds spaces to communicate itself and to dialogue with the world. The missionary agencies are a discrete symbol of this dialogue with the world, capable also of helping the media to be more themselves, that is, to reflect what is happening in world society, with the focus on real people, without becoming imprisoned by ideological or economic prejudices. An important contribution of these agencies is to highlight the value of religion linked to culture. Usually in the media world, religion is presented as an exotic curiosity, as intolerant fundamentalism and terrorism, or attempts are made to erase it from the world of communication. In contrast, religion, particularly the Catholic religion, is more often than not the source of a person's dignity and the basis for social development. Another contribution is the presence of an abundant network of correspondents, priests, and lay people, eager to communicate their situation. On the contrary, in the media, because of the economic problems that afflict them, especially after the 2008 crisis, they are eliminating more and more staff, reporters, correspondents. And so journalism is reduced to a copy and paste from agencies or generic sources. What is characteristic of these agencies is also that they see the different freedoms of religions and of press and of human rights as united. In many countries, these rights are increasingly being curtailed or stifled. This sometimes puts them at risk of closure, either directly by the political powers or indirectly. The example I quote here is a weekly magazine, Sweet Evangelia, the Light of the Gospel, founded in Moscow in 1994, but that the Orthodox Patriarchate wanted the church to close. And so in 2007, it was closed because there were some tension between the Orthodox Patriarchate and the Vatican. Sometimes, in fact, there are tension between the Secretary of State and agencies or groups of missionaries and so on. However, it has never come to closure. Anyway, tensions usually occur because the Vatican Secretariat of State has to juggle between religious and press freedoms and real or hoped diplomatic relations. Let me just add one word, because before there was somebody who was asking Mr. CHU the difference between promotion and propaganda. I think the mission is what makes the difference. Mission means to give yourself, to give your life to other people. This is mission. This is promotion, because this is the promotion of the gift of God, of the gift of life. Propaganda is just to communicate words without life. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Father Bernardo. And also thank you for all the three speakers. Very inspiring speech. They try to investigate the notion of communication and the relationship with the church from different perspectives, from a historical point of view and also from a theological point of view, digital theology, communication theology, and also give some examples of pastoral practice and ministry. So thank you very much. So it's time for discussion and open to the floor. So we already see some questions in the chat box. So Annie is very diligent in reading all the papers, and he gives the questions before the presentation already. So one question for Father Mission and one for Father Bernardo. So you can also see on the chat box. For Father Mission, Annie, thanks for your insights on communication and theology. Communications in the Catholic Church is always seen as instrument of evangelization. How can you convince seminaries and college of studies in China or other places to take it as a discipline of theology and an essential means of formation for the clergy and laity? So maybe Father Mission can answer first.
Thank you very much for the question. Actually, I wrote my MA thesis on integrating communication formation in the seminaries in China. Well, in my study that I found out how to convince, before we are convinced, we have to aware in what kind of situation we are in. Recently, that I had an online reading books. It's a kind of open class that in which we normally offer only 15 slots, only allow 15 people to join us to read a certain book. That's a program organized by Radio Veritas. Last year, I read a book in Chinese called 你被手机偷走多少时间? How much time your phone has stolen? How much time your phone has stolen from you? So this 读书会 this reading class has shown a lot of attention, not only the priests, religious, and also parents, and even some young people. So we had conducted the reading class for this is going to be the 4th time, and in that reading class, I'm aware that many people, though all of us are using mobile phones every day, but it it was their first time to realize how their life is being influenced by the social networks or these modern communication technologies. I think for the seminaries, clergy and lay people, first thing is we have to create a kind of awareness and to have them aware how much their life is being influenced by the modern technologies, and also at the same time to be aware, as John Paul II reminds us, that the culture that shaped by this rapid development of modern communication technology, the mass mediated culture or the digital culture that we are living in. And then the second way to, after we are aware the situation, and our reaction would be, especially in a seminary setup, knowing that the communication situation is challenging, that we cannot really avoid, then we have to be ready. So in our formation programs, so integrating communication formation, it is very important. It is actually not new, and even back to 1985 in the Ratio Fundamentalis, that's the education and formation for the seminary formations. It's already encouraging that the communication formation should be an integrated part in the colloquiums and in the formation programs in the seminary setup. And then what I like to emphasize on the formation of the communication in the seminaries, we know that not everyone is communication experts, but every one of us, especially for the future priests, we have to form in this communication spirituality. From what I shared in communication theology approach, what flows is the communication spirituality. It's like we have to form ourselves the communicative disposition. It is like the awareness of we as communicating being, and then we are living in a mass communicated culture. And how do we live our life today? In what kind of disposition and spirituality that we carry on our daily life and the ministry in the future. So communication spirituality is very important, that we realize that our connection with God, who is a self-communicating God, and who invites us to communicate every day and to share our life with others every day in love. And so it's demanded of our openness with God in prayer, in solitude, in meditation, and then our openness to ourselves to open for change, and also our openness to others, which is the willingness to understand others, to listen to others. And it is with that kind of spirit, communication spirituality, that make us a more communicative person. We are always ready to listen, to accompany, and to journey with others. And that will make, no matter, maybe we are not really knowledgeable with those technologies, but that does not hinder us to become an effective communicator. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Father Newsom. So we have another question for Father Bernardo. Two questions. So I think you read the question already. So one is about the regulation of religious information on the internet in China, which took effect in March 2022. So what's your opinion on that? Will it restrict the proclamation of gospel or exchange information with those outside of China, or will improve China-Vatican relationship, help improve the flow of information between China and the Universal Church. And another question is about your opinion on TV 2000 and Radio Maria. So,
first of all, that one about China. At the beginning, this regulation on religious information on internet seemed that there were many articles by Christians, above all Protestants, saying that no, everything will be quiet. We will have freedom to publish, and so on. Also, some Catholics they say this. Now we see that there are many difficulties to be recognized as a group and then to be capable of publishing, because there are rules. That is, you have to be recognized by the government in order to publish something. So this means that many groups that they would like to be recognized, even if they belong to the official church, they are not recognized because these offices, they delay the permission, they delay the recognition, and they don't permit so they don't permit the publication. Secondly, the point is that the unofficial church is absolutely in this way eliminated from the internet because they belong to groups who are not recognized by the government, and so they cannot have a website. Yesterday, I received a news about one website, CHU, little help.
Little help for
practically
Catholics.
Yeah, it was a very quite well-known group and website. They have decided to stop the publications because the office, the government office, doesn't give the recognition of the group. Very, very strange. So it seems that it is a kind of twisting much more the freedom of information, the freedom of information. The second part of the question is we all have hope that the relationship between China and Vatican can improve. But up to now, there is only Pope Francis that says that everything is going well, because the Secretary of State, the Secretary for relation with the states, Monsignor Gallagher, Cardinal Parolin, and others, they all say that there are difficulties. All say there are difficulties. So I don't know. Of course, if there is improvement in the relationship, definitely it would become also an improvement in the information, in the information field, because the church needs the information field for missions and for contacts with the international community. The point is that I don't know yet. At present, I don't know a kind of improvement. Perhaps somebody says that it depends on who will be the chief of the Communist Party after November. Let us see. I don't know.
thank you.
The other question about
Your opinion on the TV
Radio Maria
2000
and
Radio Maria.
2000.
We don't know what's that. Maybe you want to explain, or you can reply later.
It is a very Italian question because TV 2000 is the television of the Italian Bishops' Congregation, and Radio Maria is a radio, how can I say, devotional radio, but which has a large following. Perhaps is the most is the radio with the highest audience in Italy, Radio Maria. I have I have produced some programs for Radio Maria. I would say there are a lot of devotional topics, but also there are quite good topics like, I don't know, doctors who talks about medicine, missionaries' experiences, analysis of the Italian political situations, and so on. Instead, the TV 2000 is a quite official communications. I think that the problem with these instrument, and with all the instrument of the church, is the fact that they are built up in an office. They are not produced in the relationship with the people, in the situation of which we talk. So it is always a kind of reading the situation and then adjusting the situation. In some way, it is how can I say, a clerical vision, and not a real communication with the reality. Perhaps this is the risk. I wouldn't say that all the production of Radio Maria or of TV 2000 are like this, but this is the risk.
Okay.
Perhaps it's the risk also of other Catholic televisions.
Okay, thank you. So, any other questions for our speakers? Okay, Father Mission.
I just like to share a little about this online restriction. Just continue with what Father Bernardo have said. He's right that now the government is requiring those who operating like a religious apps or website to apply for the recognition or license. And in the case of the Little Help for Catholics, 天主教小助手呢, it's become a big issue in the past days because it's officially closed down now. But it's considered from my research. Actually, last night, I talked to the developer of the Little Help for Catholics. Some data I like to share with you. They are considered one of the biggest Catholic website or app. Their amount of their downloading is more than 1 million. And then every day there are more than 200,000 clicks or users using their applications. When I asked them what's the procedure for you to apply for the license, first they told me that to apply for that license to upload religious contents, first you have to, it has to come from a recognized church community, either parish or diocese, and then you have to submit 3 names who will be responsible for that website or app, and then these 3 persons has to undergo a test examination, a written examination. And the contents of that examination is first the Chinese law, and then the second part is the knowledge about religion. That's not specifically on Catholic, but the 5 government recognized religion. So you will be asked questions about Buddhism, Taoism, all these things. And then the third part of their test is you have to write the essay on, because they will give you a case study, like if something like a natural disaster happened, as the religious website, how would you report this kind of a case? so you have to pass this test in order for you to get a license. But from the information that I got, even those recognized like parishes or dioceses, it's not easy for them to get this license. Okay, just to share some information.
Thank you. So I saw Professor Shen MI have a question, right?
Yes. Thank you for all speakers, and it's wonderful. Yeah, it's a very inspiration. I have 2 questions actually. One for the Father Shen MI and another for Dr. CHU. First one, I think you have very wonderful, very powerful metaphor, the music and the instrument, and in the communication, this matters. I just wonder, because I'm outsider of the Catholic Church, and I know little about the Catholic theology. To my understanding or knowledge, it's if you want to play, if you want to show the music, you must have the instrument. I don't know whether it's possible to show or play the music without the instrument. So this, I think, to my question, I think, is it possible to communicate with God or other, as communicators with other communicators without language, without any kind of medium of instrument, but through mind to mind, as because I'm studying Buddhism, mind to mind transmission or mind to mind communications. So this is a question for Father Shen. And another question for CHU. I think I enjoy your presentations, but I have one question. I think you mentioned that so digital theology. I'm not because I'm a little bit wondering what does it mean by the digital theology. We have the called the digital church, digital Bible, or digital this kind of thing, everything. But what does it mean by digital theology? Is different from the other theology we have or traditionally have, or something new created by this digital time, or some kind of other AI or other, so the new theology, the theory or idea came out from this kind of digital times. Thank you.
So who want to answer first?
Maybe Dr. CHU, you go
Dr.
first.
CHU, you want to, because you have the priority, because they answer for many questions already. So I want to give you the chance. Yeah.
Sure. I think I will answer the second question. So digital theology, because actually there are a few disciplines about maybe for digital religion or like the digital ethnography, those things, at least in the field of humanities. So I try to concise about digital theology. It is basically a theology engaged with all types of digital space, digital devices. I would expand it to AR or AI, VR, etc. But try not to expand too much in 30 minutes. So anything with digital devices, digital space. But I tried in a way because I think in the 1990s, usually people are very struggle about how things in digital media? Is it too inhuman that we can't engage? So related to your first question, part of my argument in my presentation is that media, there are pros and cons in different types of media, and even in print and culture, people also create problems in media. Let's say actually pornography can also happen in print media, but it's just how we use it and how to create a testimony and witness online. So that's part of my argument. I will let Father Min-Shen to answer another one.
Father Min-Shen.
Okay, thank you for the very interesting question from Professor Yu Xue. Actually, when I share about the communication theology, the center point of communication theology is like a communication, community, and communing. And it's in communing that where the perfect communication manifested. In the University of St. Thomas, during my time as a student in the program of social pastoral communication, we developed what we call the Christian communication model. The ordinary model, communication model, is like you have the sender, the message, and the receiver. But in the Christian model, especially in the salvation history of Christianity, you see that a while ago I have shared like the Trinity, Revelation, Incarnation, and the Church. So you can already see this trends that in the Old Testament, God communicated Himself through media, through different ways and means, like people, prophets, kings, judges, and also natural disasters or phenomena, or even wars or historical events. These are by media. But why we call Jesus as perfect communicator of God? Because God is seen, is touched, is can experience, because He Himself has already there. So the Christian communication model that we develop is the message become the messenger, and the messenger become the message. And then for the third elements in the communication process is the receiver. And the receiver, while receiving the message through the sender, and its reaction is not only to be knowledgeable of certain or to receiving certain information, but become a live communication and communing to the center through the message. So it's no longer like the three elements, sender, message, and receiver, but it's leading to the communion in which that the sender, the message, and the receiver become one.
Yeah.
So it is also reflecting the spirituality of St. Paul when he says, it's no longer I that I live, but Christ living in me. So after receiving the gospel, my life changed. I become in communion with the one where the gospel coming from, which is God.
Yeah.
So the spirituality, the Christian spirituality, and in the whole salvation history is the invitation for us to take part in the life of the divine, to become one with the divine. So the perfect communication, even in spirituality, in prayer, what do we call? Okay, like for the common understanding of prayer is like we have to through words, through language, through gestures. But the perfect communication is without all these means, without all this media, I become one with the divine.
Exactly.
I think in Buddhism, you call it the Nibbana. I don't know how to call it in English. In Nibbana, it's like all of a sudden you feel that you are become one with the Buddha.
In English is Navina.
Navina, okay, yeah. So you become one with the Buddha.
Yeah.
So I think that's the similar understanding with the Buddhist. And then also in prayer, we have the oral prayer and the meditation use the mind, and then the contemplation. It's like become one.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Very good. Mary, can I for 1 minute? Yeah.
Well, I see a question for Dr. Chu first. In fact, we are almost time's up. So
respond.
can we extend for a few more minutes?
Okay.
For the Dr.
Yeah,
Lev?
sure.
Okay.
We can extend.
So maybe I just ask Dr. Chu whether you want to add anything to the question. Maybe it's also related to what you answered just now.
It's about the research.
Yeah, it's about the research on digital theology. How is it look like in the near future, especially for Chinese or Chinese in diaspora?
Oh, thank you. I think Father Michel or Father Bernardo touched on a bit about the future of how we engage with digital theology. Actually, I was talking to a number of Chinese, not especially Catholics, but Chinese Christian in general, that how they feel about it. In general, because they actually before the March operation, they already have done certain kind of measures to see how dangerous they put something online, because it's usually checked online already. So I know a number of them is actually more optimistic than I think, because they're like, oh, we're already doing what we should be doing. Then because usually, at least in my other research about persecution in China, usually how they try to take someone down is more related to political sensitivity. At least maybe someone who is very famous in the area that they may have influenced. Also, they look like they are a political leader that bring certain kind of social movement. So usually, those kind of people may get caught or get stopped. But if you are in a more like small group communication level, because China is huge, 12 billions. Let's say Christian have 1 billion. So actually, not every district are not that strict to limit your usage of digital media. So of course, they now say that you post something online for an evangelistic event that may be dangerous, but it's not like always that they will cause. It also depends how you have a good relationship with the local government. That I know many exceptions in case that actually is quite safe. So that it will also depend. This kind of dynamics also influence how the Chinese diaspora, not only Hong Kongese, but also how Mandarin speaking people engage with them. I know a number of people who grew up from house churches that they actually trying to develop a network to influence back to China, that they have an online seminary, something like that. And so far I heard that because you know how China have restriction on which type of seminary they can go. So because it's not that strict that people will check all the courses you take online. So actually they have quite a good number of enrollment in some online seminary outside China. So I usually news because we usually read some news let's say on the Voice of China or persecution website. So tend to be more negative to bring attention. That's normal in media. But we also have to learn about the ground levels, that how people really feel about that. That how they do things, or actually there are many exceptions in China that maybe not reported in news because it's not accessible. That's also the limitation of digital media that I may say. So
thank you. So the last question goes to Anthony.
Okay, so I just give 1 minute response to Father Mi. I fully support your idea. Yeah, actually, it's very good. Yeah, because at the very beginning, for about 6 or 70 years ago, when we start the theory of mass communication, we believe that it is a process of active and passive. Like a bullet theory. Somebody inject the information into the audience, then the audience was one to receive it passively. But in faith, actually, you are making a very good point that both of them are subject. Both of them are active. And so we hire a term from traditional Catholic theology, is that intersubjectivity. So the missionary is giving the sending the message of Jesus to you actively, and then it will not achieve the process of communication until the receiver take actively say, I believe. Yeah, so it is very good intersubjectivity. Both of them are subjects. And it is perfectly good, yeah. In the case of some area in the world, very difficult for evangelization. The missionaries are preaching the good news at the cost of their life. And actually, the believers, they are receiving the good news, the gospel, at the cost of their life as well. So you suggest to promote the theory of theology of communication is perfectly necessary, urgently needed for the church nowadays. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And although there's one more question in the chat box from Cynthia, so maybe we don't have enough time to answer, but it's worth to look at it, and the speaker can decide how to answer Cynthia. It's about yesterday's Cardinal Taglic raised the possibility of media as a world to be evangelized. So faced with the challenges of materialism and of this evangelization about how to communicate effectively the incarnation of Jesus Christ and every person. So the person permits the structures and the prohibitions.
Can I answer? A brief answer for me is that just because we are challenged with materialism and authoritarianism, it's very important to have to give some gesture. For example, challenges of materialism means that every person has its own interest as the main push for their own life. But if there are people who start sharing what they have with others, this is a very simple evangelization, like about authoritarianism. Normally, authoritarianism, they choose some person and say, you are intelligent, and throw away others, they say, you are not intelligent. A Christian, a Catholic, a person, a religious person embraces intelligent and non-intelligent person and accept all of them. And this is something against totally authoritarian. So I think that it is possible always to evangelize, above all in this situation, which is more and more, how can I say, dehumanizing, because materialism and authoritarianism are destroying the human life, not only religions or some products of the human civilization, but they are destroying themselves.
Thank you. So thank you, all the three speakers, Dr. CHU, Father Mission, and Father Bernardo. Although no audience there, I would like to give a big hand to our speakers.
Thank you very much.
So much. We have a very fruitful discussion. So, Anson, do you have any announcement?
I just want to make my expression of gratitude to thank you very much for all the speakers here today and the moderators. We have a very good discussion. I think for me, at least, I didn't expect to get all answers, in the panel, but I got a lot of questions to ponder, after that. I think it's more meaningful than getting answers. I think the same as still attendees, and So tomorrow it will be our third day program. The theme will be the science development and the missionaries, and then the cultural exchange between East and West. And so it's the turn of Professor CHU and Johnny. And
yeah.
yeah.
We are
So,
listening to you.
see you tomorrow at 3 o'clock.
Yeah,
Okay.
thank you.
Thank
米星會會過香港嘛？
哦，
有機會去。
有機會去。
有機會去
I like also take this
contact me,
opportunity to thank the center, especially Dr. Lam. Just for your information, for those who are interested in communication theology, one of my translations, pastoral communication, is going to be published by the center, hopefully soon. And then I hope that if this could be made available for those who
are chance to talk to you face to face. Yeah.
Okay, sure.
In detail.
And also, Dr. Chu, our center is interested in doing some research on the impact of, say, online mass on our application. Keep in touch. Let us, I would like to have your idea on this. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Dr. Chu and
Bye.